Imagine a cold, rainy evening on a busy city street. A sleek, black luxury car comes to a stop at a red light, its windows tinted to shield the world outside. Inside sits a wealthy businessman, scrolling through his phone, disconnected from the hustle and bustle around him. Suddenly, a small hand taps on the driver's side window. The man glances up, startled, and sees a child standing in the rain, drenched and shivering. The child's eyes hold a mix of desperation and determination as they mouth the words, "Please help me." At first, the man hesitates, his mind racing with questions. Who is this child? Why are they out here alone? Against his better judgment, he lowers the window slightly, and what the child says next leaves him speechless. It's a plea that challenges everything he thought he knew about life, wealth, and purpose. What could possibly drive this child to stop a stranger in the middle of a storm? And how will this unexpected encounter change the lives of both the child and the man forever? Stay tuned, because this is a story that will touch your heart and remind you of the power of kindness in the most unexpected moments. The businessman, still unsure whether he should roll down the window further, gazes at the child standing in front of him. The rain has soaked through the thin fabric of the child's clothes, and their shoes are barely recognizable beneath the mud. The child's face is pale, their lips trembling, and yet there's a strange calmness in their eyes. They're not begging in the usual sense, not pleading with desperation, but their presence feels like a silent cry for help. "Please, sir, I need your help," the child says again, their voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. The businessman shifts uncomfortably in his seat, glancing around. The street is busy, but no one seems to notice the child. Everyone is too preoccupied with their own lives, too caught up in their own worlds, to care about the person standing right in front of them. He could just drive away, pretend he didn't see anything, but something about the child's gaze makes him pause. His hand hovers over the window button. For a brief moment, he considers just ignoring it and driving off. It would be easier, safer. He's never been one to get involved in the lives of strangers, especially not on a cold, rainy night like this. But there's something unsettling in the way the child is looking at him, almost as if they can see right through him, as if they know something he doesn't. Against his better judgment, he lowers the window just enough to hear the child clearly. The rain hits his face, and the cold air rushes in, but he's too focused on the child to care. "What do you need?" he asks, his voice sounding more impatient than he intends. He's not used to this kind of interaction, especially not with a child on a street corner in the middle of nowhere. The child looks up at him, their eyes wide and filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "I'm lost," they say, their voice quivering. "I don't know where I am, and I can't find my way home." The businessman feels a knot form in his stomach. The child's story doesn't make sense. He looks around again, scanning the area. This part of the city is far from any residential area, and it's late. Who would let a child wander the streets alone at this hour? "Where are your parents?" he asks, trying to keep his voice steady. The child's expression falters for a moment, and for a split second, the businessman wonders if they're lying. But then the child's eyes fill with tears, and they look down, unable to answer. "I don't have anyone," the child says, their voice breaking. "I've been alone for a long time." The businessman's heart sinks. There's something in the child's words, something in their voice, that tells him this isn't just a random encounter. There's more to this story than meets the eye, and he feels an unsettling sense of responsibility creeping over him. He glances at the child once more, his mind racing. Should he help? Should he take the child somewhere, call the authorities, or drive away and pretend this never happened? The businessman's thoughts are interrupted by the sound of a car honking behind him. The light has turned green, and the driver behind him is impatiently waiting for him to move. He feels a sudden pressure to make a decision, but he can't. The child's eyes are still fixed on him, pleading silently. "Come on, move!" The driver behind him yells, his voice filled with annoyance. The businessman clenches his jaw. He can't just leave the child here, not like this. He takes a deep breath and looks at the child again. "Get in," he says, his voice softer now. I'll help you. The child hesitates, their eyes flickering with uncertainty. But then, after what feels like an eternity, they nod and climb into the car. The businessman watches as the child struggles to close the door, their small hands shaking from the cold. As they drive off, the rain begins to fall harder, the windshield wipers working overtime to clear the view. The silence in the car is thick, uncomfortable. The businessman glances at the child from time to time, but they're staring out the window, lost in their own thoughts. "Where do you live?" the businessman asks, trying to break the silence. The child doesn't answer right away. Instead, they look down at their hands, which are still trembling. Finally, they speak. "I don't have a home," they say quietly. "I've been living on the streets for a long time." The businessman feels a sharp pang of guilt in his chest. He's always lived in luxury, never having to worry about where his next meal would come from or where he would sleep at night. The child's words hit him harder than he expected. "How long?" he asks, his voice barely a whisper. The child doesn't answer right away. Instead, they glance at him with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "Long enough," they say. "Long enough to know that people don't care. They just pass by like you did." The words hang in the air, and the businessman feels a deep sense of shame. He realizes, for the first time, that he's been living in a bubble, disconnected from the world around him. He spent so many years focusing on his wealth, his success, that he's forgotten what it means to be human. They drive in silence for a few more minutes, the tension between them growing. The child's words echo in the businessman's mind, and he can't shake the feeling that something is deeply wrong, that this encounter is part of something bigger than he can understand. Finally, the child speaks again, their voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "I need to find my sister," they say. "She's all I have left." The businessman's heart skips a beat. A sister? He hadn't expected this. He hadn't even considered the possibility that the child might have family out there, somewhere. But the child's eyes, filled with hope and fear, make him realize that this is no ordinary situation. The child is not just lost, they're on a mission that could change everything. The businessman's mind races. Where could the child's sister be? Why are they separated? And what does this mean for the child's future? The questions swirl in his head, but there are no answers, only more uncertainty. As they drive through the city, the child's gaze remains fixed on the road ahead, lost in their thoughts. The businessman can't help but wonder what lies ahead for both of them. Will they find the sister? Will they uncover the truth behind the child's words? Or will this be a journey that leads to even more questions than answers? The rain continues to fall, the streets now slick with water. The businessman's grip tightens on the steering wheel, his mind consumed with the mystery of the child and their quest to find their sister. The story is far from over, and the road ahead is uncertain. But one thing is clear, this encounter will change both of their lives forever. The city lights flickered in the distance as the car continued its journey through the rain-soaked streets. The businessman's mind raced, each passing moment deepening the weight of the encounter. The child, still lost in their thoughts, had barely moved since they spoke of their sister. There was an almost haunting stillness in the car as the rain continued to pour, as if the world outside had been muted, leaving only the fragile silence between them. "How long has it been since you saw her?" the businessman asked, trying to break the silence, though his voice faltered. He had to know more. The child didn't look at him immediately, but after a long pause, they spoke. "A year," they said, their voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "A year since they took her away from me." The words sent a chill down the businessman's spine. He had known, of course, that this wasn't just any ordinary encounter, but now, the reality of the situation hit him in full force. He'd thought he was simply helping a lost child, but this was something much more complicated and much darker. The child's eyes turned to meet his, filled with a raw, painful honesty. "They told me she was adopted," they said, their voice quivering slightly. "But I know the truth. I know she was taken. She's still out there. And I'm going to find her." The businessman felt his heart twist. This wasn't just a simple case of a child being lost. There was a history here, a story of separation, of injustice. He could feel the weight of the child's words, as if every syllable was a plea for help that stretched far beyond their own personal tragedy. And somehow, he was becoming a part of it. His role in this story was growing bigger with each passing moment. "How do you know she's still out there?" the businessman asked, his voice low and filled with disbelief. He wasn't sure if he even believed in half of what the child had said. But the look in their eyes, the determination in their face, told him that they weren't just fantasizing. The child sighed, their small frame deflating slightly with the weight of their burden. "Because they told me she was adopted by a family far away," they explained, their voice soft but insistent. "But when I saw their faces, when I saw the people who were supposed to be her new family, something wasn't right. I saw something in their eyes, something cold. It made me think they knew something they weren't saying." The businessman's mind raced. What could this child be talking about? Who were these people, and why did they take the child's sister? What could possibly explain the fear in this child's heart, the knowledge that something sinister was at play? The child continued, unaware of the businessman's mounting questions. "I don't know exactly what's going on," they said, their voice quiet but filled with purpose. "But I know I can't give up. I have to find her. She's my only family left." The weight of those words hit the businessman harder than he expected. He had always taken his family for granted, his wife, his children, the comfort of knowing that no matter what, he would always have someone to come home to. But this child had no one. And in that moment, something deep inside him stirred. The car slowed as they entered a more industrial part of the city. The streets were darker here, the neon lights giving way to the more muted, fluorescent glow of factories and abandoned buildings. The businessman was still unsure of where he was going, where this journey would lead. But as they passed a street corner, something caught his eye, a sign, barely visible through the rain, that seemed familiar. "Wait," he said, his voice sharp with sudden realization. He turned the car around, his heart racing. He had to check something. The child looked at him, confused, but remained silent. They drove down the block, the sign growing closer with each passing second. The businessman's eyes narrowed as he saw the building for what it truly was, a small, run-down orphanage. He recognized it from the research he had done, from the whispers that had followed him in the business world. This was a place that had been under investigation for years, rumored to be involved in the illegal trafficking of children. "Stop," the businessman ordered, his voice urgent now. "Stop the car." The child's eyes widened, panic flickering in their gaze. "No," they whispered, shaking their head. "Not here. They'll see us." But the businessman had already stopped the car. He looked at the building, the darkness surrounding it, and then at the child. He could feel the tension between them now, the air thick with anticipation. This was no coincidence. This was where everything was leading. "I'm going in," he said, his voice steady but firm. He couldn't explain why, but he knew this was the place. This was where the child's sister, and possibly others, had been taken. The child shook their head furiously. "Please, no. You can't go in there. It's dangerous. I'm going to help you find your sister," the businessman said, his voice filled with resolve. "We're going to make sure no one else suffers like this." The child was silent for a long moment, their face a mixture of fear and hope. Then, with a deep breath, they nodded. "Okay," the child said softly. "But please be careful." The businessman exited the car, his mind racing with questions. What would he find inside this grim building? What secrets were hidden behind those faded walls? But as he approached the door, he felt a deep sense of purpose. He wasn't just helping a child anymore. He was uncovering a truth that could change everything. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and stale air. The building seemed to be abandoned, but there was something unsettling about its stillness. It didn't take long for the businessman to realize that he was not alone. Faint voices echoed through the halls, and there was a sense of movement in the shadows. "Stay here," he whispered to the child, who had followed him, now standing at the door, looking terrified. "I'll find out what's going on." But before he could move further, a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking his path. The businessman's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the person, the same cold, calculating man he had seen earlier, the one whose eyes had sent a chill down his spine. This was no ordinary man. He was the head of the orphanage, the one behind all the rumors. "You shouldn't have come here," the man said, his voice low and threatening. The businessman stood tall, unflinching. "I'm here for the truth," he said, his voice steady. The man chuckled darkly. "The truth?" He took a step closer. "The truth is, you've crossed a line. And now there's no going back." As the man moved toward him, the businessman felt a sense of clarity. He wasn't afraid. He had to do this. For the child, for the lost sister, and for all the others who had been taken, disappeared into the shadows of this place. The businessman's resolve strengthened as he prepared for whatever would come next. The child was counting on him. He wasn't about to back down now. What he didn't realize, though, was that this encounter was only the beginning. The journey ahead would lead him through a web of lies, corruption, and unimaginable truths. But through it all, one thing would remain certain. This child's plea for help was not just a call to rescue one sister, it was a call to save many. As the businessman and the man locked eyes, the tension in the air palpable, the story was far from over. What would happen next? Would they find the child's sister? Would they uncover the dark forces at play? The answers were yet to come, but one thing was clear: the road ahead would change them both forever.